I asked everybody that was involved with VBS and our children's director, Kylie, to leave up some of the decorations around here so the congregation could see all the work that goes into it, all the design. It's almost too bad that it only lasts 3 days. I don't want to single out, and I don't want to get in trouble here. And I look around, I'm not sure who all's here, but Julie and Tiffany, are you here? Yes. Just stand up. You don't have to say anything, okay? But just stand up. Listen, they have been for weeks and weeks ahead of VBS, planning all of these settings and decorating all the rooms, decorating the hallway, all the ideas. Like this whole theme was scuba, and it had to do with water and God's great acts involving water, Jesus stilling the storm, Jonah, so forth. And just the idea of putting that blue cellophane or whatever it is on the windows so you think you're underwater when you walk in. I can't think of things like that. But at any rate, you guys, we owe a lot to you. And so I want to thank you for everything you did preparing for it. Obviously, I don't want to take away anything from all the other volunteers without whom we couldn't put anything on like this past week. Let me just say this last thing. Probably in all the decades that I have pastored, the one thing I will hear from people who have essentially no church background, don't know the Lord, don't understand the gospel, if they have any little bit of light, it's almost always, when I'll ask them, were you raised in a church-going family? No, but I remember going to Vacation Bible School. Now, God plants seeds in those settings in an amazing way, and no one's like God who's able to keep those memories alive and use them down the road. So this was a profitable week, and harvest, who knows how many years down the road. Second thing, just before we look at the scripture today, we have, and I brought all the certificates up here. Not everyone is here, but I want to just present membership certificates to 3 of the people that we have recently received as members. And so if Gary and Melissa Stoddard will come up, and Guy Olson, you don't have to say anything. Just come up on the platform. Don't trip on the canvas that's here and sue us. And that's not a joke. When I was in Portland, I knew a minister in Vancouver, which is across the river, who baptized. Some woman came to church, said she got saved, had a baptismal service. This is why I warn against immersion. She was immersed, got up, went up the steps, walked out, slipped, fell, injured her arm. It was no big deal. Sued the church. So apparently the conversion and the baptism didn't stick. She sued the church for not having non-skid flooring for people that were coming up out of the baptistry. So anyway, Guy Olson. You've been here for a while, but not as a member. You really didn't completely fit in, So, Gary, God bless you. Yeah. Melissa, the Lord bless you. Welcome them if you would, please. You may return. The themes that were followed for VBS are what I want to look at today. There was the issue of Jonah, and these two women made a huge whale with black plastic and a fan that blew it up, and it looked like the top half of a whale. And there was a opening in the side, and the kids got to climb in and see what it was like being in the whale's belly. So anyway, another theme, lesson under the whole theme was Jesus stilling the storm. And so I want us to look at Jesus and the lessons, marvelous lessons that we can learn from Jesus walking on the water, stilling the storm, and so forth. The story specifically of Jesus walking on the water and then entering the boat that the disciples were in is given in 3 of the 4 Gospels. It's in Matthew, it's in Mark, it's in John. Now, in each case, the details or the overall structure of the story is exactly the same. But like many of the Gospel records, there are smaller details included in, say, John's record than in Mark's, and so also with Matthew. And so what I've done is I want to read, you don't have to turn to them, but I want to read the 3 different accounts of what followed immediately after Jesus fed the 5,000. So that helps us remember this was about halfway at least through Jesus' ministry. And in Mark 6, Matthew 14, John 6, these scriptures are found. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. I just liked looking at that and the way it read. So beginning in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately after this being the feeding of the 5,000. Okay? Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." Jesus said, "Yes, come." So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified, began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. Now Mark chapter 6. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and head across the lake to Bethsaida while he sent the people home. After telling everyone goodbye, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Late that night, the disciples were in their boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. He saw that they were in serious trouble. rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. He intended or seemed to go past them, but when they saw him walking on the water, they cried out in terror, thinking he was a ghost. They were all terrified when they saw him. But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am here." Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped. They were totally amazed, for they still didn't understand the significance of the miracle of the loaves and fishes. Their hearts were too hard to take it in. That evening, John chapter 6, that evening, Jesus' disciples went down to the shore to wait for him. But as darkness fell, and Jesus still hadn't come back, they got into the boat and headed across the lake toward Capernaum. Now that was the same area of Bethsaida. Soon a gale swept down upon them, and the sea grew very rough. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the water toward the boat. They were terrified, but he called out to them, "Don't be afraid. I am here." Then they were eager to let him into the boat, and immediately they arrived at their destination. Now you'll notice different details in all 3 of those accounts. Only one tells about Peter walking on the water. Only one mentions that as soon as Jesus got in the boat, they were immediately at their destination. They all mention that the storm was stilled the moment Jesus got into, at their invitation, got into the boat. There's some things from this, some lessons out of all this that I want us to look at today. And I don't necessarily have alliteration points, but just observations here, lessons that we can draw. Notice this. First, the disciples went on a journey commanded by the Lord. Now, in our lives, walking with God, we should know, though we frequently forget, we will encounter obstacles, hindrances, difficulties, trouble, even while we walk the road God sent us on. When we're walking in a pathway that the Lord wouldn't send us on, a path of sin, for sure we're going to have trouble. But contrary to what the prosperity gospel today tells us, even when we're on an errand commanded by God, we will encounter trouble. There is still a devil. There's still a wicked world. There are still wicked people who are tools of the devil. And we will encounter obstacles, hindrances, difficulty, trouble. We have to face that. This is not any sign of the displeasure of God or somehow not blessing us. It's, Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulation. And the word tribulation speaks there to being crushed like grain. There will be crushing difficulties that we'll encounter. The thing that enables us, or should enable us, to survive and survive well through those troubles is that God sent me here. At no point in the boat could any of the disciples say to each other, "I told you we shouldn't have undertaken this. I told you that the skies didn't look good. I'm the one that told us, let's don't go." No, Jesus told them. All 3 records make it very clear Jesus commanded them. You cross over to the other side. I'll get there. Don't worry about me. The second thing that we look at, that we can see here, is the level, maybe, or the degree of trouble. I think the New Living Translation might do a little bit better job of describing how severe the trouble was. It says they were in serious trouble, far from land. Now, these were all experienced fishermen. Yet, even they recognized they're in serious trouble. Here's what's interesting. The word speaking about the waves and the wind comes from the root word for baptize. They were being baptized in the Sea of Galilee. What it meant was, not that they were going through the ritual of baptism, they were taking on water. It's the same, and well, I'll get to that in a second. Save that. They were sinking. I mean, this wasn't just being tossed around a bit. The waves were breaking over the boat, and it was filling the boat, and they were rightly in serious trouble. Any of us ever been in a case, not physically like this, where trouble in our life and difficulties and unanswered questions, and Lord, what in the world, where do I turn, what do I do, what's going on? And we sense we're taking on water. I feel like I'm sinking. It's dark, the wind is howling, and even though I'm yet afloat, I'm pretty sure if this continues, I'll go down. We ever been in a case like that? Yes, we have. So we're not talking about small issues or trivial things that come into our life. Hangnail type stuff. We're not talking about that. We will encounter severity. And the severity, there's a third point. The severity will, this is a profound statement, the severity will be severe. How do we know that? Here's another word that comes out of all of these records. It says that they were straining to row against the wind and the waves. Do you know what the word for straining there is? Tormented or tortured. It was so difficult. They were being tortured in this trouble. The Jesus, this trip. And Jesus is the one that sent them. And it got so severe that the Greek word is they were tormented or tortured. They were that weary, that troubled, ready to give up, but they knew they couldn't because they drowned. This is serious. They couldn't quit, but they didn't know how much strength they had left. Here's another point. We can't tell for sure, but the New Living Translation gives us the estimated time. It's probably a bit longer than even it says. Before darkness fell, likely before even true dusk, Jesus said, I'm going up to pray. These people, let's send them all home. And we can't get into the whole story there, but Jesus said he knew a riot was about to take place where they wanted to try to crown him king and then start a revolution, do their best to, and he put a stop to it. Sent them away. Then he sends the disciples, you go across the other side, I'm going up to pray. Let's just say that was towards the end of day, the beginning maybe of dusk. We're talking about 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. Well, the other versions will say Jesus came to them at the 4th watch of the night. The 4th watch of the night was an adaptation from the Romans who occupied their country. And they had 4 watches, each 3 hours long. The first watch, guarding, being a sentinel, whatever, was from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Then the second watch was 9 p.m. to midnight. Third watch was midnight to 3 a.m. Fourth watch was 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Now it says during the third watch, Jesus came to them. So it's very likely, if we just split the difference, is 4 o'clock in the morning. And they had been rowing approximately, let's say, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock the previous evening. So they were well into as long as 8, 9 plus hours of being in this storm, and had only managed to get 3 or 4 miles. They were in trouble. And also, even though they were still in shape and they still periodically fished, they were exhausted. Totally exhausted. Ever been in a situation that just goes on and on and on, and you pray and you worry and you fret and you try to do things and you ask God, please intervene, please bring this to a stop. I feel like I don't have enough strength to keep going, and it just keeps going. Think about that. Waves splashing over them, muscles sore, trying to row against the wind and the waves for maybe 9 hours. That's the definition of a trial, of a dark period. We don't have it, but knowing what we do know, don't have a record, but knowing what we do know about the disciples, surely the subject came up, where in the world is Jesus? He told us to head out, but we thought he meant I'll be along right away. Where in the world did he go? You ever felt like that? And I'm not talking about an angry, bitter accusation of God. You don't even care. I'm not talking about that. That's wicked. But in the best of pure hearts, Psalms are filled of David. Lord, where are you? Lord, it's time to draw your hand out of your bosom. It's time, O Lord, for thee to work. There are times when we think, man, alive. Here's another point. Jesus can see in the dark. You know that? Because from still on the mountaintop, wherever it was that he was praying, it said he saw them. In the older version, the King James says, he saw them toiling in their rowing. He not just saw them on the lake. He saw the wind. He saw the waves. He knew their aching arms and backs and saw how hard they were struggling. He saw it. Now, the devil will lie to us and tell us God doesn't even know what you're going through. Yeah, he does. He saw them. Supernaturally, he saw them. He sees us. He knows what we're in. An accusation from the enemy that I think is several degrees worse than God doesn't know comes on the heels of the temptation that he doesn't know. Well, then I can say to you, scripturally, he does know. Well, then the devil ratchets us up a little bit. Not only if he does know, then why doesn't he do something? That temptation is worse because it says he does know, but he doesn't even care. That's worse. The other has to do with awareness. This one has to do with his heart, his character. He doesn't even care. Yeah, he does. And I know it can seem that he doesn't, but it's a lie. So we, without any feeling, maybe with contrary feelings, we speak back to the lies that come to us. He knows. He cares. He knows what he's doing. Because involved in all this was, I don't mean to sow doubts in your hearts right here, but Jesus watched them for, I don't know how long he prayed. I assume that he prayed with his eyes closed. We used to check on us 5 kids. We would always check on each other. And then for dinner or whatever the prayer was, you say grace for the meal. Jonathan has his eyes open. And of course, when you say that, you're a stupid little kid, and you don't realize the comeback from the parents is, how did you see that he had his eyes open? Okay? Jesus is God, so he always knows. But whenever he stopped praying, even, and saw them rowing, he let it go on. He didn't sprint down the hill and say, man alive, the storm's coming, and, take off. I got to help them. The one who had total power to stop it like that, let it go. Because he doesn't care. He's hard-hearted. He's cruel. He's sadistic. He loves to torture people. No, he had a lot that he was planning to do with these 12 men in this boat. And so he began to walk on the water. Of course, I'm assuming, didn't see him right off the bat. I don't know if they were 3 or 4 miles into the lake. And people say that the lake generally is 7 to 10 miles wide at its widest points. And Jesus is walking. Of course, he can walk at any speed he wants, even on water. But they don't see him immediately. And then when they do, they're scared to death that it's a ghost. I think there's sometimes, especially in the midst of trial, tribulation, difficulty, even in some ways, God shows up in the form of maybe another issue that sidelines us, or something that comes along that we think we didn't need. But it's God. Just briefly, with all that we've had going on with D-Day and World War II and all that, quite a while ago I read a book about, from a Christian standpoint, about how God used storms to bring about victory. George Washington would have been trapped at the tip of New York. What's today New York? Horrible storm moved in. Surely, the horses trying to pull wheeled guns, and they're bogged down. But they were able to escape. The British couldn't see him because it was cloudy and it was raining, and they couldn't see him. They'd have never gotten 350, nearly, 1,000 soldiers off the beaches of Dunkirk. The English army was set up to lose their entire infantry. And terrible storms came in, and the cloud cover was such that the Germans couldn't fly over the beaches and strafe all those helpless soldiers until everybody with a rowboat, a fishing boat, a yacht, a sailboat, didn't matter, from England crossed the 40 miles of the channel and got all those guys off of there. Probably they said, this is the last thing we need is a turn of bad weather. But God saved them with it. He knows what He's doing. We just simply have to force ourselves to remember that and stake out that position and say, I don't care what I feel like. He knows how tired I am. He knows how weary I am of this. He knows. He sees. He's not blind, and He does care. So He's walking on the water, and He gets close enough. And of course, they didn't recognize Him. They're scared to death. And all three accounts have the same words. This, if you don't remember anything else, I just love this, and I'd never seen this till yesterday. But all three records, when Jesus said, do not be afraid, it is I. You know what the literal reading there is? And I don't know why it's not translated this way. The literal reading is, the I am is here. Wow. I wish they'd have translated that literally. They're scared to death, and they see Him walking on the water. They're more terrified than now of drowning from whatever this is they see. Don't worry. Take courage. Don't be afraid. The I am is here. We know what that is. Moses, the burning bush. God says, go into Egypt and tell Pharaoh, then the most powerful ruler on earth. And here's Moses out in the sagebrush feeding the few sheep. Who's he now? Up against Pharaoh. He said, you go in and you just stalk right into Pharaoh's house, his throne room, wherever, and you tell him, let my people go. Oh, sure. And so Moses said, well, who shall I tell him sent me? And Jesus answered, or the Father out of the fire, you tell him I am sent you. I am. What a fortress. What a rescuer. What a reliever of trouble and worry and heartache. Don't be afraid. I am is with you. Now, not only did He reveal Himself, but he did some revealing to the disciples. Peter, typically, it fits with his personality that we have all through the record of the Gospels. Peter's the one that says, and when he says, if it's you, the language there doesn't mean that he's doubting. He's assuring. He says, well, it could just as well be since it's you. Since it's you, allow me to come to you walking on the water. Here's another thing, that Peter, even when he threw his leg over the boat, he wasn't being nuts because Jesus told him, you come here. So even that short little trip of Peter's was commanded by God. We really only have the foundation to trust God for wonderful things, supernatural things, unusual things, only when we're certain that He has directed us. There's way too much of this, name it, claim it stuff. And like I don't know how long ago, and I hope there's somebody here, I'm joking, but I'm hoping there's someone here still working on getting me an early 1960s Corvette that I talked about a few Sundays ago. I'm going to trust God for a Corvette. Well, you're going to be walking. Because God didn't tell you that. But whatever in His Word and through His Spirit, He tells you, I'll be with you, fear not, so forth, so forth, so forth. I have every bit of granite, solid foundation under me to trust Him because I'm on an errand He sent me on. And so He told Peter, with His own authority, yeah, you come to me. Peter goes over the side. He starts walking on the water. Who knows? I don't know what the other disciples were thinking or everything going through Peter's mind. But we know that he saw the wind and the waves and he started to sink. Right in the presence of the great I am. Here's the tragic thing. This great, omnipotent, nothing too hard for Him, God, even in His very presence, we can, through unbelief, sink. Peter was within arm's length of Jesus. And he's heading down. And he cries out, Lord, save me. And so Jesus reached out, grabbed a hold of him, brought him into the boat. And then he said, why did you doubt? And doubt what? Notice he said, why did you doubt me? The I am. Why did you evaluate and value the danger of wind and waves and the spray and all this and the darkness and probably thunder and lightning? Why did you put more confidence and thus fear in that than in the I am who's right here? He revealed to Peter the tendency to doubt him. And we have to remember this. I think that there is, when we get into trials and tribulations, there is often a human, not sinful, but there's a human tendency to be afraid and forget. Because the record here too says that the disciples' fear and Peter's lack of faith was related to the fact that the feeding of the 5,000 just hours before didn't seem to register with them. And part of Jesus' rebuke there is marveling at, you just saw me take 5 little shrimp, fish, 5 little sardines, and a couple little dinner rolls, and I fed 5,000 men. Assuming the vast majority of them were married and they would have children, it is not insane at all to think that this would be half or more than half of the population of Gillette. And they were standing right there and watched him do that. Knew the meager thing he had, and he multiplied that. And hours later, they forgot it. Didn't take it to heart. The issue here with all the disciples, and particularly Peter, we always have to remember too, interpreting, I think there's a human tendency to forget. But the disciples, in all of the Gospels, all of the missteps, the rebukes they got, and the failings that Jesus confronted them with, this was pre-Pentecost. They still had not been filled with the Holy Spirit, purging their hearts of what? What is the core of the sinful nature? It's unbelief. It's unbelief. That is the root issue of the inclination that we're born with. It's unbelief. I do not trust, spontaneously, there is a lingering suspicion of the Lord, of God. Will He come through? Can He come through? Does He care? Is He cruel? Is He sort of sadistic? He doesn't even know what I'm going through. And why is He getting some kind of pleasure out of tormenting or torturing me, like the word here, straining at the oars? We've been in this trouble for long enough. Lord, what in the world? They're combining the human tendency to forget, and primarily, very quickly, one of the things they forgot, I think it's easier to forget when forget God's blessings that are good upon good upon good. Feeding the 5,000, was that some dire thing? Those people weren't going to starve. And the disciples knew it, and they told Jesus, send them home. They'll be all right. Now, the situation that the disciples were in was a different ballgame. God does some kind blessing thing where we're not that bad off anyway. And we tend to shrug it off. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for all your blessings, Lord. But when the spray's coming in your face and the water's coming over the sides of the boat, and you're dead, tired, worn out, and it's black and thunder and lightning, and God comes to your rescue, you'll likely remember that longer than the feeding of the 5,000. Now, I've got to quit. In the end here, after Jesus rebuked kindly to Peter and to all of them, then you notice this. The minute they surrendered, we could say, the boat and their mess to Jesus, the minute, all three of these records, the storm stopped. And John is the only one who does mention, very interesting, he sent them on the east side of Galilee. He said, go across to the western, no, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. But anyway, go across to the other side to the Bethsaida, Capernaum area. And they do. And John alone says, and as soon as he got in the boat, they were at the shore. They landed where Jesus had told them to go once they trusted him and brought him on the boat. Couple thoughts, and then we'll quit. No ship can sink with Jesus on board. Our little ship of us, it can't sink if Jesus is on board. Second, no person will ever sink who calls on God like Peter, Lord, save me. He can't go down. Third, no God-assigned destination can be denied as long as Jesus accompanies me. He'll get me there, whatever he sent me to do or be. And then, finally, no opportunity, whether we enjoy it or not, no opportunity to teach us a lesson, to reveal something about us, is ever passed up by Jesus. All that he did here in one relatively small event. So whatever difficulty we're in, the I Am is with us. He has an aim, and he will accomplish, and he will teach, and he'll reveal. And we will, of course, be the better for it. We are 2,000 years later still reading and talking about this. Let's bow our heads, and we'll just dismiss with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this record and all that it means. And Father, I pray that in our hearts we would recognize these are part of being in a fallen world, these days of sometimes darkness and difficulties and obstacles. But Lord, you never abandon us to them or in them. You are with us through them all, and you see, and you know, and you care. And if we hold steady, in the end, triumph will come, victory and growth in grace. Go with us, I pray, today. Help us absorb this truth into our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed in about 30 seconds.